Welcome to this third special episode of the month, August 2023, episode 84 in fact. This is Jamie Benning here talking to you from Budapest. I'm still here working on the World Athletics coverage, but as promised, here is the third Emmy nominee episode of this month. Firstly though, I just wanted to remind you that you can support the podcast for as little as $12 for 1 year. That helps me make 24 or more episodes in that year. You could spend that on a coffee and a croissant, at least at home in London you could. And you could donate by visiting patreon.com/Jamie Benning. There are several tiers to choose from with certain perks like video versions and even some merch. You can also buy some Filmumentaries merch at filmumentaries.creator-spring.com. I'll include that link in the show notes. Okay, so this time I have the pleasure of sharing my conversations with Skywalker Sound's co-supervising sound editor Matthew Wood, sound designer David W. Collins, and re-recording mixer Danielle Dupre. I spoke with Matthew and David together and then separately with Danielle. So you'll hear Matthew and David first and then my chat with Danielle after that. So this really is a bumper extra episode. Matthew and David are nominated for Mandalorian Chapter 24 in Season 3 of the show. Matthew has also been nominated for his work on Obi Wan Kenobi Part 6. Danielle has been nominated for her work on that same Obi Wan Kenobi episode as well. So first of all, here's my conversation with Matthew Wood and David W. Collins, and after the ads, you'll hear my conversation with Danielle. And as usual, I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. Thanks for joining me today, guys. It's exciting to be able to talk to you. I always enjoy talking to people whose work I admire. Talk to me in turn about, in a nutshell, can you describe your roles on this show and these shows, and you know how you interact with each other as well?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Matthew Wood, and I'm the supervising sound editor on these projects that we're working on here at Star Wars streaming for Disney Plus. So we have I'm in charge of the whole editorial department, the sound editorial department, which consists, of dialogue and Foley and sound effects and ADR and integrating that into the mix and working with the legacy material we have from Star Wars from the library and integrating new sound design elements and just sort of interfacing with the director and picture department and making sure all that goes as planned when we build the soundtrack.
Great. And you, David?
Yeah, so my name is David Collins, and I work for Matt. No, I mean that he brought me on a few years ago, and to started in animation a few years ago, and still working animation, but was the sound designer on Mandalorian Season 3 and work for Matt in whatever capacity he has me join the crew, and it's certainly a pleasure. But yeah, in particular, doing sound design and sound effects for a lot of these shows. Sometimes mixing, but mostly sound editing and sound design.
Both of you gents strike me as people that kind of have, like me, Star Wars running through your veins. I mean, you to a greater extent. Matthew, you, of course, started off at LucasArts game testing and then went on to work in a sound capacity on the prequels, voice of Darth Grievous, and performed as Bib Fortuna. And David, you were also at LucasArts providing many voice roles. And I mean, you've hosted Celebration, of course, you've voiced characters in Rogue One, Force Awakens, the Book of Boba Fett. I mean, how do you keep ticking off these bucket list things? I mean, working on a show and shows like these must feel like, more dreams coming true.
Yeah, I mean, it does. I mean, David and I are both huge Star Wars fans, and that's not a prerequisite to work here. I'll say that, but it is certainly helpful. Coming in early on in my teen years to Lucasfilm was a dream, and then just being able to work with George Lucas on those prequels, and I'll say that he never really had us wearing one hat. George never was the kind of person like, you're doing this job and just stay in your lane. He was very open to a lot of, learning new technologies, all the acting we did, just input on various levels of the production. And he was always very integrating of sound as a major component of the track, starting with Ben Burt, back on the original movies, which has been a fantastic mentor and sort of godfather of the Star Wars sound at Skywalker. Still has an office there. We still consult with him and talk to him. He's the most easygoing guy ever, and an amazing film historian to have as a resource. But certainly George sort of left that open for us, and I never felt pigeonholed in what we were doing, and so that was why a lot of things opened up like this. And just to speak on David's part for 1 second, like I always saw him working in the games division where I also started, and just sort of we had a parallel career path there. And I was always very much wanting to get him over to our side here on for the television and film work. And so it's been a dream because he's got the same sort of ethos that works great at Skywalker Sound.
Yeah, it seems to me that sort of ethos you talked about getting involved, in different aspects, has been there from the very start. I think of like Phil Tippett put in the Max Rebo costume he created, or Jim Bloom doubling as Luke Skywalker for some scenes. It must be great, David, for you as a fan to have your feet on the ground there as well.
Yeah, and I think everyone that works on this stuff is passionate about their job, even if they're not necessarily a huge Star Wars fan. I mean, they're passionate about film or TV, or whether they're working in games. And I think you have to be, in order to have a successful point of view that you can get across as an artist in any capacity. And that is one of the nice things, as Matt mentioned, that I love about Skywalker Sound and working for Lucasfilm and everything that George Lucas created in terms of these companies for artists to thrive in, is that you do get this opportunity to kind of approach things at different angles. And I mean, I look at when Mark Hamill speaks about science fiction, it was very clear that he was a fan coming in to play Luke Skywalker for the first time in the mid-'70s. And I think having passion is ultimately the most important thing. And one of the nice things, just to go back to what Matt said about being able to play different roles within a creative effort like one of these shows, is there really is this kind of openness to opportunity, whether or not I get to design or hey, can you mix this one episode, and sure, let me jump in here. Or even in one case of Star Wars Visions, we started consulting on some of the music for the opening logo, and Matt was said, well, why don't you have David write it, that sort of thing. And so I did. And there's just, it's these dream projects, we're very lucky being at Skywalker Sound, because Skywalker Sound has this history of just amazing work from these incredible sound artists that I grew up wanting to have a career like that. And so, we take it very seriously when we get these opportunities, and we just give it everything we have, that passion that I mentioned.
And the bar has been raised by so much by these Lucasfilm and Disney shows, and we're talking about Mandalorian season 3, the episode 24 that's been nominated here, so highly anticipated for this now beloved show. Expectations are ramped up, the pressure presumably is on the creative teams to, come up with something new, but at the same time honoring the legacy that's been there for so many years. How do you go about doing that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is to try and chase what it is that I want to hear as a fan. The first time that Matt and I sit down with Jon Favreau and we watch the episode, your imagination immediately starts going about, oh, it could sound like this, and oh, we can maybe grab these elements over here. Oh, we don't have anything for these things over there. We're going to definitely have to design something new for that, and that. And you just kind of go through in what we call a spotting session, and the entire time your creative flow is just really strong. And we're very lucky with Favreau and Rick, because they're so committed to excellent sound, but also giving opportunities for great storytelling and being very communicative about what they want. And we were able to just kind of bring our aesthetic to it, our Star Wars passion and knowledge, but also try and do things to support all of the different characters, the emotions. And that can be really, really tricky. There are some, obviously with Star Wars, some legacy sounds that we're always trying to honor. But a lot of times you have to expand on those. I think about R5-D4, for example, is a classic droid all the way back from the very first movie. But if you think about what he did in that movie, it's very small, and so our reference for that is very small. And what we have to do is extrapolate and try and create new material that sits right alongside with whatever fans are used to or accustomed to hearing in the original movie. But now in The Mandalorian, and particularly in the episode that we're talking about for the Emmy nomination, he's doing all kinds of stuff, as are the mouse bots, as are these armies of Mandalorians coming at each other, and stormtroopers with jetpacks, all that jetpack material, the sort of dark trooper material. What are those dual pistols going to sound like? That was one of the first sounds I made for the season, was those explosive, almost hand cannons, very very much inspired by Ben Burtt's work in Raiders of the Lost Ark with Indy's pistol. But they should be so big that the limiters can't handle it. Like, it just sounds like it's just clipping almost, this kind of heavy metal distortion every time he fires it. These are the kind of things that we go back and talk about, and then Matt and I will usually have a call afterwards and just kind of sync up on everything that we discussed with the editorial department as well as Favreau, and then we just set about going to work, and we try and just give it everything that we can in terms of what we want to hear and what we think is right for the story and for the episode.
Mm-hmm. I would imagine those kind of, I call them boundaries, but there's probably a better word for it, that are already in place in terms of the Star Wars universe, is a comfort in some way, because the sort of limits within which you're working. You're able to cross those lines, but not too much, I think those restrictions are helpful in a creative medium, aren't they?
Very much so. I mean, it's funny because obviously these shows, we want the quality to be really high because we want to have it, on Disney Plus. We want somebody to be able to put in a movie or the animation series or one of our streaming shows or something and have it all be in the same sort of parity for quality. But our schedules are obviously quite quick. So we're always running on instinct, and some of that, even in the picture editorial department, so we get a guide track from them that has something that they've laid out sort of thematically where they want to hit things and what story points are to be the key moments of the show. And they'll put in, whatever track they have, because they're working just as fast as we are in their picture side. So they're hoping that we're going to come in and obviously replace it all. But it is interesting to have that moment where you hear something attached to Star Wars, you're like, that doesn't quite sound like Star Wars, and there's this undefined kind of moment where we guide it back, because Star Wars sound, just like John Williams' music and all that, is so synonymous with Star Wars. Like the sound of a TIE fighter and the lightsaber and a Jawa and all those things are going to have a sort of signature that we want to have to be sort of this subconscious glue that's going to hold this together. And it's a really easy, comparative to visual effects, easy. Like we can make things really feel like Star Wars quite quickly with that sort of backdoor into your subconscious with something you've never heard before, or you haven't heard since you saw the original movies or something like that. So that's a great resource that we have, and we try to keep everything in that same zone that the original that Ben Burtt and David Acord and folks along the line have created, and that's sort of where we want to live.
I mean, years ago, sound as a process was always very much at the end of a film's post-production. And I know in talking to other professionals in your industry, like Gary Rydstrom and Mark Mangini, that these days you get brought on a lot earlier. What stage are you guys brought on in the process? Because I understand in some movies that I've talked to sound designers about, for instance, David, have said that their sound has informed the visuals in some ways. It's more of a two-way street now, isn't it?
Yeah, there are times when we're brought in very early for something. In the case of The Mandalorian, to echo what Matt said, this is television, and what we're trying to do is give a film treatment to, on a television show, which a season of television like The Mandalorian is, in terms of runtime, is like doing 3 movies in a way, almost. It's a lot of material, and so you are moving quickly. That being said, there are absolutely still times where we're brought in very early for something to consult on a creature or a droid or some kind of effect that needs to be in pre-production so that it can go to the picture department or it can go to animation, and then sometimes they animate to our sounds, for example. That does still happen. In the case of Mandalorian season 3, I think we were brought in as they were just starting to put together their first rough cuts of some of these episodes, and so we look at them very early on. And in fact, we look at them before a lot of the visual effects are completed. And as we start to do work, and I'm doing design work, I'm getting updates from the picture department with new visual effects from ILM, and that really helps. That really helps kind of to be in that early, because you start to see some of the creative decisions that are being made artistically, and that can help you figure out, for example, what your limitations are. I mean, to speak a little bit about the limitations that Matt mentioned with Star Wars, I think there can be a misconception that we just pull from this huge library of sounds and, push the Star Wars button, as it were. But it's much more about curating those sounds, because all of those sounds contain strong emotional memory. At least I know they do for me. And so I operate on the assumption that I think any sound artist makes, which is that, people are going to hear it the same way. If I use a very specific sound from a very specific scene in Star Wars, that's going to trigger some sort of emotional memory for me, which then I need to consider using those sounds with great intention, or not using those sounds and creating something new. And that really is the trick. And we do have those conversations quite a bit. That being said, back to the visual effects, when those come in and you start to see that a lot of those decisions have kind of been made for you artistically, that you get to decide how much do I lean into classic Star Wars versus create something totally new. The Mandalorian itself is a show where visually they're tackling those same issues. How many pill lights do we put up at this Imperial base? And depending on what I see, I get to go, okay, well, this needs to have that classic Imperial klaxon alarm in the hangar, or not. These are the kind of clues that we get when working close with the picture department. And I have to say that the editors on The Mandalorian and on all of these shows really are really important, wonderful collaborators in this process in figuring out a lot of these issues and getting us to the final mix.
Yeah, that trust in the post-production department, which we've created over the last, how many years it's been now since we've started, but Favreau and Filoni have a really great sense of the type of folks to work with us. And so we've had great episodic directors on these shows, plus the post-production editorial department, who are our first advocates. They a lot of them love sound. They know they're coming to Skywalker Sound, which, we're not going to just come in at the end and slam bang something into there for you. We're going to craft something with you together. And so we're brought in early, and sometimes, we're brought in sometimes to come and look at the sets and to hold the props and to look at rough cuts and read scripts early as John's working on them. And so it's a really, Kathy Kennedy has definitely invited us into the process early, just like George Lucas did. So that's, you really feel included. You feel like you're building something. It's a very unique experience, and it's all, it's all the way through from, the script all the way to when we're doing our final mixes and color, DI, it's a great team. And so we're happy for the aesthetic that has, that John and Dave have come before and put in place with the staffing that we're working with.
Great to be in a position where you can let those ideas percolate, actually having held that prop and been on that set, it allows it to kind of, you to absorb it rather than to do it with a blank slate, so to speak. You're both trying to accomplish a soundscape that feels fresh to new viewers with new expectations. It needs to have that legacy kind of twist that we talked about, and you're trying to give identity to locations, characters, ships, the props that people are holding. How do you ensure that all of that remains cohesive, firstly? And secondly, how do you ensure that it's going to read properly to people, whether they're watching it on their home cinema screen, their 50-inch TV, their iPad, or their phone?
Well, we have, a lot of things in place. One is, luckily, they're hiring folks that did understand and had worked on the previous things, such as David, myself, and Acord, and we have Dave Filoni, obviously, who's a huge force in Star Wars, a storyteller, and everything from the visuals to the sound to the music he's deeply involved in. So we try to keep that cohesiveness, and then we usually try to hire folks that have a familiarity with Star Wars. That's always helpful, and we all kind of feel it. And it's a very open team as far as if somebody puts in an explosion, it's just as David said, we're like, that's the explosion they used in this other scene back in this other show that I think we want to preserve that being special for that show. Let's do something slightly different here, or actually no, we want to use something that's exactly identifiable to that because it's going to help the story along. And we all sort of have that. It's so subconscious, and it's such an emotional feeling that you get that we all share with each other. And it's great when we have new folks coming in too. They're so passionate about wanting to work on Star Wars, and then when they have access to our library and our designers, then we get to see their interpretation of what they want to cut together in the soundtrack, and we can gently guide them into something that's going to be cohesive. It's just a really, together team. And speaking of the episodic directors too, because they have their vision of what they want the show to be, and a lot of them are, they tell us what the story points are and how they want to go with it, but they do have a certain amount of trust with us to sort of make sure that we are honoring Star Wars from a sound perspective, and it's not going to sound like something totally different, and they're going to, it's going to take everything off track, So it's a good open door policy that we have with each other to share how we're all feeling about the track, because sound is so emotional. So so that's sort of how I hope we. Oh, and then also as far as listening to it on different systems, we do have a mastering spec that we're given from Disney Plus that we try to make sure it adheres to. So things are, you'll be able to hear the dialogue quite well. The action scenes will be very punctuated. The music will play well. And then at Skywalker Sound, we have some very proprietary tools to get us to hit that spec. That are very specific to Skywalker, that they've worked and crafted with the artists, the mixers, to say that this is going to represent our mix, the way we balanced it, the way the director wants to hear it, and it's then going to then be nudged to hit the exact numbers it needs to hit at Disney, so we can have that balance of hitting the spec so everything sounds the same. Everything's, you're not going to be turning your volume up and down on your television while you're listening to something. And it's also going to have the artist's vision. That's something very unique to Skywalker in our R&D department that we've put together to make that happen.
And if I may, Matt, if it's all right, Jamie, I'd love to give just a shout out to Matt and David Acord and Dave Filoni, going all the way back to 2006, 2007 with George Lucas. There was this very forward-thinking vision about taking Star Wars and moving it to the small screen with Clone Wars. George Lucas actually built out whole wings of the tech building at Skywalker Sound specifically for television production, this kind of production. They figured out how to go from the prequels to the Clone Wars, which is no small task, and really pioneered the ability to take that aesthetic and move it into television format, in the case of the Clone Wars, an animated television format. But the point is, Matt and Dave Acord were figuring out how to do that for TV 15, how many years ago it was? About 15 years ago, something like that. And then, when Matt brings in, say, Bonnie Wild comes in, she does Rebels, and when I came in, I did Resistance. There was this kind of, television, almost Star Wars training that I feel like a lot of us went through in order to really understand how to give that aesthetic to these shows. And so when The Mandalorian comes around, or Obi Wan Kenobi, we're ready. A lot of those issues have been solved before we got there. And with Matt's guidance, we're able to basically get everything done in a way that we and the directors are satisfied with, in terms of how it sounds, as cinematic as it ends up sounding. And I really do think that is because of a lot of visionary work that took place a long time ago at Skywalker Sound, and it's just a continuation of that legacy.
It really does feel like there's still that collegiate kind of feeling to Lucasfilm. When I've talked to people from, Nilo Rodis Jamiro or, Joe Johnston, that existed back then, and it's great to hear that there's still that kind of ladder within there as well, and people mentoring each other, which is so important. One of the things I'm always interested about is people's kind of techniques to achieve certain things. I've talked to editors like Walter Murch and Paul Hirsch in the last couple of years, and they say sometimes they'll just turn the audio off completely, step away from it, walk back in the room, hit the space bar, and see if it reads correctly without the sound. Do you do the inverse of that? Do you ever turn off the visuals to make sure that the audio reads correctly? You can say no.
Yeah. I mean, I think the only and I love that by the way of watching it without sound and making sure it still communicates. I think that's a really great technique that I've seen a lot of picture editors do. But I think our equivalent would be, you really want a signature sounding thing that you're making. It could be a ship, it could be a droid, it could be a creature. You want it to have a feeling where, and this is actually a J.J. Abrams quote that he gave us when we were making BB-8, which was, I want to feel like if BB-8 rolled up in the hallway outside this door right here when we're sitting, you would know it was him before you saw him. He just really wants to make sure, like, everything about it, the head motors, any kind of chirps, any kind of servos, or any of the vocalizations he makes does not sound generic. It sounds very specific to the character, and that's something that, we try. So we're not thinking about it visually. We're thinking about the audio maintaining a signature across all of its elements.
I was just going to say, I think as a mixer, there is an equivalent to what Walter Murch and Paul Hirsch said. And of course, we're huge fans of their work. They're legends at Skywalker Sound. But there is a mixer equivalent to that, which is, when you first are cutting sound into a scene, everything sounds huge and satisfying. And when you start to put it together with all the elements, the dialogue and the Foley and the ADR and the music, and you really start to understand what the track is going to be and how it's going to flow and what kind of the melodic shape of this dialogue concerto, sound effects concerto, whatever it is that you're making starts to take shape, you start going, do I really need to hit all of these elements as heavily as I hit it when I cut it? Or can the violins take over? Or, do we really need to tone this down because really this needs to be an intimate conversation between these two characters, and maybe we don't need that ship in the background taking off to be so big, or whatever it is. Those conversations happen, I think, a lot, with Matt and mixers, and then certainly with the episodic directors, where, you are trying to shape something that is dramatically impactful and not necessarily always, sound. Sometimes silence is a choice. Sometimes backing off is a choice, because then it makes your strong moments even stronger. So I think that there are dynamic considerations that I think make a great parallel to the point that Paul Hirsch and Walter Murch made.
I often think as well that you must have to have an extraordinary amount of adaptability and flexibility, given, the digital tools that we're now working with. Everyone can have an opinion, of course, on a edit timeline, and I know I've heard of like producers coming in with their own timeline edit, of a picture edit. I'm not suggesting anything like that goes on, but the fact that you can change things more easily now, back on film, it was a destructive process, and it took a lot of work to sort of go back to the start again. How does that impact your work, and how, at what stage do you begin to lock things down?
I think mostly it affects it in a positive way, because George Lucas used to always say when we were doing the prequels, he's like, I'd love to be able to have access to the one Foley footstep if I wanted to change that. And he just liked that idea. And that was, I think the prequel movies were the first all Pro Tools mix that we ever did in it all, like ever. And so we had everything in there, and I was like, look, we can go all the way back to a unit and change it. And he didn't really mess with that like on a way that he wanted, just for the fun of it. But I think he liked to know that he could. And it's the same way we have everything when we're playing it for the final playbacks for our directors. We can go back to every single thing. It's all been pre-dubbed and all that, but it's all accessible. Even back to if we have something that the picture editor might have cut before we even worked on it, right. And they're like, you know what? I'm still feeling that one thing about that door clunk. I really liked it from the production sound. Can you grab that? And so we want to have that option open like that. But we do start locking it down once we start mixing as far as our creative flow of what direction we're going into. But certainly we can get to any of it and all of it. And I think that's just comforting to know that we can. We don't really have many people that take advantage of that in a malicious way whatsoever. But certainly it's a positive thing, I think, to be able to have that open like that until the very last minute.
This is where Matt is a wealth of historical information, because he was there with George Lucas and, has worked with Pixar and Paul Thomas Anderson and J.J. Abrams and has all of these stories going all the way back to to the days where yeah, you had to make these decisions and pre-dubs that went to the stage that were basically baked in, and to go back was tremendous expense. But since I've been there, the training that I've received from Matt and everyone else is to have all of the elements at your fingertips in case a director asks for them. And generally they don't, but it is nice and feels very impressive when they ask, hey, can you bring up that one sound that was in the very first cut? And you go, oh, this? And you just bring it up immediately. That is a normal part of the workflow. But yeah, to Matt's point, it wasn't always. And we still pre-mix, we still pre-dub, but we keep everything handy and at the ready just in case.
And the paint is only dry when you're at the very, very final stage.
Yeah.
You bring together dialogue and music and Foley effects, and you're creating the atmosphere. How do you guys both kind of keep fresh ears on this stuff? And, you could easily get lost in the woods, and not see the wood for the trees. Is there something that you do to kind of make sure you see or hear things in a fresh way?
When I guess having our editorial team come in, because here's a guide of what we're looking for these areas, and if we've designed something specific, if David's made something specific, we'd like to use that for these. But also a lot of it's open. We give a lot of leeway to our editors, like, why don't you cut what you feel works here, and we will guide you. And so that keeps it fresh, certainly, with our editorial team coming in. And then always when you go to the mix, it's a dark room. It's aesthetically like you can just sit there and enjoy it like you're watching a movie, and that is a whole different experience when it's all together. Usually the visuals are closer by the time we've mixed. We're looking at stuff that's been color corrected, and you can kind of look at it from a audience member perspective and not so much that you're working on the track. And so that brings a new freshness in. And then when it's go time and you're playing it for Filoni or Favreau or Rick, it's that moment where everyone's working on instinct and you're just feeling the flow. When there's more people in the room too, there's kind of another experience that happens because we're all collectively feeling it at the same time, and we can look at each other and go, wow, that really worked. That just really worked. Or maybe maybe we get rid of some music there, or maybe whatever it is, we kind of can do it on a collective level, and that part keeps it fresh, I think. And the sounds, Star Wars, Ben used to talk about making sounds kind of once a sound is sort of in synchronization with an action and picture, you can get away with a lot with that sound. And he certainly went. I loved how weird Ben went. Like, there's a lot of sounds that are just you wouldn't expect that were used for certain things, and that's what Star Wars is too. It has that feel where unexpected sounds are put in, but it works once it's in sync and with everything, and it keeps it fresh and sort of in an alien feel to it. So all those things sort of combined for me keep it fresh.
If I may too, it really does help that there is a team of people that look at this stuff together. So to give an example, I wasn't the sound designer on Book of Boba Fett. I was one of the sound editors, and so David Acord made those sounds, and he might be tired of them by the time he's done. I don't know. I don't think so. But when it comes to me, I hear it with fresh ears and I immediately cut it in, and I think this is amazing. But then it goes to the mix stage, and our mixers are incredible. They're like the last line of defense too, and they're the first ones to really hear all of the final elements come together, and they start to tell us, hey, this is working, but I need to amp up this part here or whatever. And so there's this sort of team effort, almost an assembly line of ears,
like a
that
relay
hear.
race or something.
So you're constantly getting a fresh pair of ears on something that is confirming or augmenting what it is that you're trying to pull off creatively, and that's really helpful. It is a team effort, and there are a lot of people around you to kind of verify verify what you're going for if you start to get tired of something or your ears aren't as fresh anymore. So that's really helpful.
Yeah, it does sound like a relay race that runs in one direction, then runs in the other direction, and keeps going until you decide where the finish line is, kind of thing. Yeah, that's great.
Exactly.
I don't normally ask the question about, what's your favorite, this, that, or the other. But given that we're talking about an Emmy Award nomination, 2 shows for you, Matt, and Mandalorian for you, David, is there a scene that kind of you look at that you either worked on or your colleagues worked on in some way that you think that is the scene that really showcases what I do as a professional?
Yeah, I think for me, it would be the episode of Obi Wan that's out that we're showcasing for the Emmy. I really enjoyed the way that episode came together at the end. It was the culmination of the series, and we have the final confrontation, or the final for this series confrontation between Obi Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader, and it was everybody coming together on that. I mean, the music, we had John Williams themes in there. We had incredible voice acting with James Earl Jones and Hayden Christensen, and we had, the visuals were incredible, and the acting from Ewan and Hayden on the set was so riveting. And so coming up with like how we take these two titans that are fighting together, and then also break it down to a very intimate scene after the sort of fight is concluded, and you just see it in their eyes, and there's a mechanical component of Vader's mask that's broken and fragmented and revealing the human element of Anakin Skywalker underneath. And that, Deb Chow, we put an extra bit of time at the end of our mix that I held in the budget. I was like, we're going to definitely want to spend a little extra time on this last scene. Because it's, because the actors just gave it their all. We really wanted to represent that. The script did too. And so I feel like, Deb and our picture editors and our mix team and our sound editors all came together on that. And it really felt good when it's done. And I still feel emotional when I watch it after all this time. And I'm really happy to have that be acknowledged by the Television Academy. It feels really good. So I feel happy about that. And it's something we've done in recent history. And I'm really pleased by how that went.
I went to that scene that very scene this morning. That was my favorite scene of the show as well. And so much going on in that scene. Like you say, you've got all of the sounds of the broken helmet and the sabers and the dialogue and the atmosphere and the crackling, the damage to the helmet. Yeah, wonderful scene. And congratulations. And David, how about you?
Well, I mean, I suppose I should mention the episode that is up for the Emmy, which is the last episode of Mandalorian season 3. And, for a half hour, it is one of the most wonderfully dense, action-packed, just crazy Star Wars reels that I've ever had a chance to work on. And I want to give a shout out to our sound editor, Luis Galdames, as well, who was really, really critical in getting that episode to the stage and having it sound the way it does. And when all the elements come together, and the music and the Foley, the effects, and, at one moment it's a melee fight, another moment it's a space dog fight, another moment it's all these jetpacks, and then you're rescuing Mandalore and relighting the forge and all this kind of stuff. I mean, the epicness of that was wonderful, and I think was such a clear choice for us in terms of wanting to put it up for an Emmy Award. That being said, I want to just quickly, if I may, as a Star Wars fan, give a shout out to Andor, because I didn't work on Andor in sound at all, but when I saw it, I remember thinking the genius of Andor and what David Acorn did with Margit. What they pulled off was this ability to contextualize sounds that are, at this point almost 50 years old. When that TIE fighter flies through that valley and is terrifying, even after hearing it so many times over the course of our lifetimes, and those characters are reacting to the sound in a specific way, and the sound treatment is as heavy as it was, I was just blown away by that. I was blown away by sort of the fresh feeling of elements that we're so familiar with, that we scroll through and that we do variations of, for our entire careers. And yet here we are watching a show that just sounds so different, yet the same. And to me, it got me excited again about what Star Wars can be. Between those two projects, the one, the Mandalorian and Andor, it makes me excited to be a Star Wars fan all over again, and certainly very honored and privileged to be able to work on this.
Yeah, I totally agree with you about everything you both said. And, from somebody who's on this side of the fence, I just want to thank you and your teams for the work that you do, because as a fan, again, I've fallen in love with Star Wars again, because of these shows. And I'm 47 this year. It's never going away, It's always going to be a part of me and so many people. And I wish you all the best for the awards as well. You really do deserve it.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for joining me, Danielle. What was your role and responsibilities as a re-recording sound mixer on Obi Wan Kenobi?
So, as a sound mixer in post-production, a re-recording sound mixer, we work really closely with the director and the film editors after filming has wrapped and they have put together their final cut of the film or the TV show. And basically what we do is we take sound across all categories: dialogue, music, sound effects, backgrounds, Foley, and we combine everything that was prepared for us by our sound designers and our editors, and we sit at our mixing console and we combine everything together and mix it all, basically, and draw the audience's attention scene by scene to what the narrative is, what the film is, and what the feel is. And we work really closely with the director to determine all those things, moment to moment. And it's a very collaborative space among everybody in the on the dub stage. So that's what we do. It's basically a process of constant decision making and revising and decision making and feeling and stepping back and looking at it and listening and then seeing how this film is continuing to come together and making our choices based off of that.
Because I sort of always imagine, in the sort of tradition of sound and sound mixing, it's one of the last things that's done because you need all of the elements to have come together to get you to that point. But on a TV series like this, I guess like you say, it's a constantly evolving thing. So you're having to kind of be very flexible, I would imagine, to account for things that might come in late or edits that might arrive at a different time or new ideas that have come up during the post-production process.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You definitely need to stay on your toes and remain flexible and remain unattached, really, to anything other than the main. Like I keep coming back to this idea of narrative. The only thing you need to be attached to is the narrative and what the film is trying to say and what it's trying to say to the audience at that moment. But yeah, you have visual effects that are not present at what you're looking at. So you're trying to make sure you're trying to design to something that's quite honestly could be sometimes a storyboard or just an idea. You're just starting, and you're working parallel to all these different processes. And because it is the last moment, of any control over the film before it goes out to the audiences. Yeah, there is a lot of changes that happen, changes in lines and ADR and changes to the film changes to the cut of the film. But that's kind of the fun of it all is, remaining full and kind of going with the flow of everything together.
How do you sort of maintain fresh, I was going to say eyes, but ears? I know like some editors like to, stand up and walk out of the room and come back in with it playing or something like that, or, ideally you'd take a week out and you'd walk away from the project and come back with fresh eyes and ears. But how do you manage to keep that sort of freshness where there's something you might have listened to, dozens, hundreds of times even?
Over and over again. Well, lots of tips and tricks, and it's also made a lot easier when you're working on something like Star Wars because there is, particularly with this series, there is so much to look at and there is so much to think about and there's so many layers that Deb wove into the development of the character. So it's definitely a discipline to be able to look back and to take a step back, but even simple things of moving on to another scene or moving on to another episode for now, stepping out of the room for a cup of coffee and then coming back, or even sitting in a different part of the room, the sweet spot that we're used to mixing in, or even watching it on a different medium, which is actually really helpful now for streaming and TV, is just streaming it to a smaller screen and listening to it on headphones. So a variety of different options, which also is a really common practice in music as well. You'll be working on something in the studio, a recording studio, and then you'll take it to the car to see how it feels in the car, how it sounds in the car.
Right.
So similar ideas for us.
Yeah. I think, with these shows, these TV shows, these Star Wars TV shows now, we've had Andor, Mandalorian, we've got Ahsoka coming up, and of course your show, Obi Wan. You sort of have these kind of parameters already there from the Star Wars universe that's already existed. But then, you're always invited and professionally you want to push the boundaries. How do you manage to sort of take that approach? How do you achieve that? Was there an ethos in terms of the sonic landscape or soundscape of the show from the beginning that enabled you to do that?
one of the exciting things for me creatively is always working within the constraints of something. I'm not somebody who can look at a endless amount of options on a blank page and feel inspired. I think that those are better suited for people who are sound designers, who can just pull ideas out of thin air. And, that's such incredible work and hard work to do. And that's just not something that my brain and my creative process usually lends itself to. So I quite enjoy working creatively in a box that's already kind of been preset. And I find that a lot of my most creative moments happen when I'm trying to redo something or trying to do a different take on something. With Obi-Wan, I mean, we're going into the Star Wars universe. We already know what so many things sound like. And we have such an incredible, rich, iconic sound library to work with, which is also a thrill. You're kind of like, I think my coworker, Bonnie, said it once best. She's like, you kind of given the keys to the candy store when you're allowed to work with. Exactly. When you're allowed to work with the Star Wars sound library. The exciting thing about Obi-Wan and working with the constraints of that world is that it was obviously you're thinking about the canon and making sure that the canon is represented correctly. But the biggest new take in Obi-Wan is the new take of this character, and it's this new side of this character that we've never seen before. And that really informed a lot of what we did, because there's throughout the arc of the story, throughout the arc of the character, we see him in different modes. We see him as a little bit lost and a little bit hurt and a little bit wounded at the beginning and frail. And you can kind of, or frailer than we imagined him when we left him, and you can really sonically mirror that. You can make things feel more alone and quiet and sad. And towards the end of the series, when he actually starts to lose, you're questioning maybe he's losing some of his power and some of his Obi-Wan-ness. You can kind of move into the chaos and into the lostness of it all and have everything feel so much bigger than it actually is, from his perspective. So those are some of the ideas that we brought to the table with making it different. Not every single scene in this film is going to sound like exactly as you would think a Star Wars film sounds like, because that's not always the story that's in front of you right now.
Yeah. It's interesting, when I've talked to people about these TV shows, they are TV shows to us, but of course to you, they're giant film projects. They're multiple episodes, 6 episodes in this series. How does that scale and scope kind of impact the workflow compared to working in a movie? Is there a difference, or for you guys, is it another long movie or 2 movies back to back?
Well, it's not. There's definitely a difference in that we need to think of it landing and being viewed in a different medium than only a theater. There's really only a few people I think ever that will see it in the theater, unless they release it, which would be really cool. The approach, though, from the beginning is nearly identical to that of a feature, and I don't think it's like that for every TV show, but for this one, absolutely, and for the Star Wars TV shows, absolutely, because they are created like a feature. There's really no difference from the beginning of it, and we approach it just like we would a feature film. At the end of it, though, actually throughout, we have to, in the back of our minds, know and be very comfortable and confident in the translation from a multi-track, big theatrical dub stage to a small set of stereo speakers on a headphone or on a TV set. So we always have that in the back of our mind when we're very comfortable switching back and forth and checking to make sure the translation is right and making sure everything is reading as it normally would. So it's something that we carry with us, and also at the end of our workflow, we do a lot of mastering to adapt it to smaller screens. But no, it's feature first, absolutely.
And you're trying to, in the sound department, you're of course trying to make this cohesive soundscape, and that's, the on-set recording through to the sound design through to the end part of the process which you oversee. You're trying to add depth and emotion. You're kind of grounding us in locations. I mean, I'm in my loft at the moment, in my little office up here, and if I close my eyes I can hear the trees swaying, and I can hear whatever few birds are remaining tweeting on the branches. If I had my eyes closed, I could tell I was in this location. Each place in my house I could probably identify from, I could hear the road if I was in the room at the front. You have to do that with the different locations that we see these characters in. How do you ensure that each location has its own identity? I know the sound design is obviously a big part of that, but in terms of your mixing, how do you manage that?
Well, context is everything with those decisions, at least. You really need to be aware of where that scene lies within the entire sequence, what came before and what's coming after. So it's particularly with these types of films, it is very important to make it kind of lean into the hyper-realism, because it is, at the end of the day, a bit fantastic, where we are and what we're looking at. And you do want to give the viewers the experience of possibly being there, And so you do want to establish that early on, and really pay attention to what's going on in the background, and take a moment or many moments to think about what could possibly be going on in the background, even if you don't see it. What type, in Obi Wan there was this fish market scene. What would that sound like there on this planet and the elements of this planet, and then what would that sound like in reality here? What type of people would be working there? What would their concerns be? What would their day-to-day be? So it is a lot of living in the make-believe space, and it definitely is important to give a beat, particularly for the first time that we've ever seen a location, to establish it, to really help immerse the viewer in it. But then once you do that, it's just kind of all about, again, it's about the story, and it's not necessarily about how the viewers are seeing this new location for the first time, as it is about how the character or the story is seeing this location for the first time, which could often be a very different feel.
Now, one of the other things about your job is, it's also obviously the mixing that we talked about, but it's also ensuring the quality is to the highest standards as well. And, I'm always amazed by people who are super creative and people who are super technical. I imagine for your job, you have to kind of sit in both of those camps. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually one of the things I love most about it. It very much engages both sides of my brain to it. Probably, to a varying degree, depending on the day. But yeah, I love having both, having the ability to kind of switch approaches back and forth. And that's very much, if you don't have the technical side of things, then the tools that you need to use are not going to be second nature, and they very much need to be second nature if you're going to use them as a creative outlet.
And with your job being the kind of the final stage of the sound, side of the show, there's also the beginning side. The place where it starts with the on set recording. Sorry, do you have much of a relationship with that set sound mixer, or is it kind of handed off to you? Do you then go back and say, well, actually we might need this in the future or that in the future? Is that a relationship that exists, or is it kind of, the buck is pushed back over to you to carry on with your work?
It's very much dependent and varies from film to film, and for something that's an ongoing series that I would be involved with for multiple series, yes, definitely there is a relationship with the on-set sound recordist, and it's just very much a dialogue of knowledge is power, information is power. So just knowing what's going on and what to look forward to and what to watch out for is always very helpful coming down the line. But sometimes you don't have that luxury. On this particular show, we did have we knew our sound recordist going in and knew that he was top of the line, and that's really all we had to know. We all kind of breathed a sigh of relief after we knew it was going to be him, and then we saw him at the rep.
I always imagine, because I know, for instance, I work in television myself, and I know I've worked with source material that isn't you know, maybe the best, maybe there were extraneous circumstances that means there's a lot of background noise, for instance, or something like that. Are there techniques and technologies now that are really helping you to do things like reduce the noise in the background, the sound reduction tools?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Our technology for background noise reduction has really has really taken off over the last 5 to 10 years, and it's only getting better. You'll talk to some of I'll talk to some of my mentors that have been mixing for 30, 40 years, and one day I asked, what did you do a while ago with this scene when we didn't have this brand new tool that you're working on? And she said to me, we just learned to live with a lot more back then. So yeah, as technology gets better, our tools of the trade get better, and our jobs tend to get easier, but also the expectation of the sound getting better also comes with that.
Does that mean, for instance, that dialogue replacement is not as necessary anymore, that the source material of the dialogue recording can be made all that better through these new tools, or is that something that still has to be done a great deal?
I am finding it's actually quite the opposite, because although dialogue replacement ADR technology has also gotten better, and now it's possible to record an actor, actress wherever they are in the world and have us be remote during that session. We don't always have to go and fly and track them down, which used to be the case. So now that ADR is actually easier to shoot, directors are asking for it more and more and more, and it's not always
interesting.
Yeah. It's not always just a replacement solely for technical reasons. There's a litany of reasons why you would want to replace dialogue, take or performance, or even rewriting a line. Many. So ADR is still alive and well, absolutely.
I really see your job almost like a conductor standing in front of an orchestra and, making sure that certain groups of instruments are kind of rising up at the right time. And where does what's your origins in having that skill? Was this something you realized? Are you musical, for instance? Is this something you realized you could do early on?
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. I like that. I might steal that. So I didn't actually know that this job existed till well after college, actually. But I did get into this line of work through music. I grew up playing music. Wouldn't consider myself a musician anymore. But that was definitely my gateway through that. I became interested in music recording and worked at a recording studio as I started my career. I think what attracted me to this particular job and made me confident that I could be good at it is the storytelling aspect of it. That's definitely a world that I come from. I have great storytellers in my family, and that's a skill that I think I have carried on within me. So when I found that this job existed, I thought it really kind of perfectly took a couple things that I loved and knew I could have a chance of being good at together. It took sound, which was something I always was thinking about from a young age, and it took storytelling, which kind of comes naturally to me in certain settings. Probably not 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning, but but certain settings for sure. And that was the part that that really attracted me to this job in particular.
Music's often given the role of doing the heavy lifting emotionally, along with the performance, of course. But I know you're involved with the music and the mixing of the music along with the dialogue and the Foley and everything else. But is there an example in the show that you can think of where, let's forget music for a moment, where the sound work that you've mixed has sort of elevated a scene beyond where you could imagine it might have gone?
Oh, absolutely. All the time. Every time you watch something down as in the temp cut before you start working on it, you're just always so excited to hear what the music's going to do. But I will say that there is, you need to use it right, and the music needs to be right. It's not just this cure-all Band-Aid that you can slap over something and have it work. Oftentimes it can detract if you're not using it right, or distract, or more commonly, it could be so much more effective if you hold it back and if you keep it quiet, so that you do have the dynamic when you need it. And I will say, if you do have a film or a TV show that is, scored heavily, then the absence of music works just as the same as a piece of score would there, if not sometimes better.
You've kind of earned that moment, haven't you? In a way, you're able to use the other tools in your arsenal to bring the emotion. Yeah. I'm a original trilogy guy. I mean, that's shorthand for saying that I'm old now. But there were definitely moments in Obi Wan where I kind of said out loud to my wife, "Oh wow, the prequel fans are going to be going crazy at this point." There's that one scene, I think it's probably my favorite scene in the whole series, which is when Obi-Wan breaks open Vader's helmet to reveal Anakin. And there's so much going on in that in terms of sound. You've got the music, you've got the sabers, the dialogue, the crackling of the cut in the helmet, the switching between Hayden and James Earl Jones's voice, and the breathing, Vader's breathing. You've got Ewan's emotional dialogue there as well. Is that one of the scenes that was the most challenging, or am I just imagining that because it's one of the most impactful scenes in the series?
Well, first of all, kudos go to my mixing partner, Scott Lewis, who I hope you'll also speak to. The way we divide responsibilities, working together is very unique, and that scene in its entirety was very much his baby, and it is a product of him. So I want to be careful not to take credit where it's not totally due. I think that any impactful scene like that is incredibly challenging, because you just really need to get not just the whole scene, but each note in the scene right, each beat in the scene right. The director has set it up for you. She is clear about what's happening and what needs to be felt and what needs to be seen. And everybody down the line has done such an incredible job, from performances to costumes to visual effects to score. So you're kind of left at the end being like, all right, well, we've really got to...
No pressure, yeah.
So yeah, it is really balancing those emotional moments are incredibly challenging, and particularly when there is so much going on from a sound perspective. Those are very busy moments, and you really need to make sure that they feel full and exciting when they need to feel full and exciting, and when they need to feel intimate and bare and just laser focused on what's happening in front of you. It needs to feel that way as well. And yeah, you have this, huge, gorgeous score that's like all enveloping, and then you have these sound effects that are so important, and then the performance that you really need to make sure that you don't step on, that you only support. So it is very much balancing act, and you kind of start, as Scott said, I think in previously about the scene, you start with the kitchen sink. You just start with everything that could possibly be in there. And then you go through the painstaking task of slowly whittling it down to what really matters and focusing on that. And it takes a long time. It's a challenge for sure.
I always think that this question I'm about to ask you is a difficult one to ask people, and sometimes I avoid it. But given that we're talking about your fantastic nomination here for the Emmy, is there a scene in which you're particularly proud of, looking back at the show as a viewer? Are you able to kind of distance yourself enough to kind of enjoy it as a fan? Or is there a scene that, you on behind the scenes think technically and artistically you kind of nailed it?
Well, I will say the scene I had the most fun with and just was so rewarding, because it was set up so well. There's only so much we could do with sound. If it needs to be, in order for things to really, really, really work, they need to be shot well. They need to be performed well. It needs to be cut well. But my particular favorite that I was so excited about was, I believe it's the beginning of episode 3. I could. It's been a while. I could have the episodes wrong, but it's kind of more machine than man moment. See Vader being assembled, and you have these just like so dark
That's a
and
great
so
scene. Yeah.
cool. And the score is like amazing. I remember hearing the score for the first time and just being like, yes, do this. And you have the water, and you have like the, the underground feel of it all. And you have the machinery, and you have the canon of what some of these things sound like to begin with. And you have the breathing, and then it is intercut with Obi on the ship, which, in a lot of ways, it's like kind of this like biblical feel of, I don't know if anybody is familiar with the Bible. I am not religious, but there's this not a scene in the Bible. There's this part of the Bible where like Jesus is like praying in the garden before he, has to go do something that he just doesn't want, before he has to sacrifice himself. And it's this incredibly stressful, horrible time. And it really reminded me of this moment of Obi-Wan kind of praying for guidance of what he has to do. And he is just distressed and distraught. And you just see this thing, this machine being made down the line he's going to have to face off with. And I just think the sound design that John Borland did for that scene was just phenomenal. The score was amazing. I think that particular cue was Natalie Holt. I had the pleasure with working with again on this series. And yeah, the performances were great. The sets were great. It ruled. It was so much fun.
Yeah, that's definitely, as a fan, from a fan perspective, there are definitely moments in that show, the two we've just talked about in particular, that I've been imagining since I was, 5 years old and heard that Vader was Luke's father. It's like, how did this come about? And I was, there were certain points where I was just, like I said, I was kind of punching the air, going, oh wow, this is. It's kind of what I wanted to see in the prequels, and I'm so glad the series has come along to expand on those movies as well, because it really brings more and more depth. The awards that you're nominated for, you've been and you've won an award before, the Cinema Audio Society Award. How important is it for you, both personally and professionally, to get these nominations and awards? How does it feel to have been nominated for this, prestigious award, and how does it feel to have won one before?
I'm just incredibly grateful and humbling. These are definitely kind of wildest dreams moments, when you're younger and starting your career and thinking about what you want to do and where you want to go with it. I think that's just really all I can say, is just how grateful and kind of surreal it all is to be able to work with. And that's kind of really the best thing about it, is that you get this recognition for this really incredible project that you were able to be a part of. And it's very much, I don't think the award would mean as much if the project itself and the filmmakers that we're working with from top to bottom weren't all incredible. and if the experience weren't incredible, the award would be great, but it's just this amazing cherry on top of this amazing sundae. Just being able to work on the show with filmmakers like this, and everybody firing on all cylinders at the top of their game, and also so dedicated to this show. Everybody was just so excited about it, and everybody wanted it to be the best it could possibly be. And it's rare to work on a project where everybody is just so on fire for it. And that to me is the most rewarding thing. That's the thing I will remember and get excited about talking, about putting a scene together, because it was so great. I'm very grateful and very, very humbled to be recognized for this. But really the fun was making it, for sure.
Well, thanks for your time today. I really appreciate getting more of an insight into your job. As you said, when you first started, when you were first thinking about what you might do, it wasn't a job that you knew existed. I think people understand certain jobs within the industry. And I'm always happy on my podcast to kind of highlight the jobs that don't always get the chance to be highlighted. And I wish you all the best for the award.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your time. It was great to talk.
Well, I hope you enjoyed these 3 special Emmy nominee episodes. Huge thanks to the folks at ILM and Skywalker Sound for the help and encouragement, particularly to Ian. Thank you so much, Ian. Up next, in September 2023, you'll hear my conversation with Pablo Hellman, VFX supervisor for Steven Spielberg and Martin Scorsese. And then you'll hear my interview with the British Film Institute's Douglas Weir. We talk about an amazing Jaws print that was found and his work as a whole at the BFI. And I was given a behind-the-scenes tour a few weeks ago in London. After that, in October, it will be Master of Sound, Max Smith, and VFX whiz Charmaine Chan, and plenty more where that came from in the coming months as well. Thanks so much for listening and for your support. Please share the podcast. Please leave a review. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you can do so for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.